Good afternoon, evening, morning, everyone. Some of you happy tomorrow. Hope you are all well. The weather keeps changing here, so I am getting this ready for your delectation. I think it's much more delectatious if it's in tune. I know not all YouTube channels agree with that, but you know. Hope everyone's doing well. We'll get to your questions very soon, Scordy, etc. Just want to show off how this came out with a couple of follow-up bits to the video the other day. And once again, I'm sorry there haven't been a lot of videos lately. The time has not been on my side. All right, so this Telecaster into a 1965 deluxe reverb that I restored. It's going into ET65, got the Royer on it, and here's what it sounds like in this context. That mini humbucker in the neck really is nice. If I bring in the middle pickup, now there's a difference between how Brent Mason's Tele is wired and how Joe Glazer prefers to do them now. On Brent Mason's Tele, this middle pickup has all the coils active. And what Joe Glazer is doing now is just using the top coil with the bottom coil turned off. And it does, I think, sound better as a blend that way. The issue is, you may hear it in YouTube, you may not. I don't have a noise gate on the guitar amp mic. There's a little bit of 60 cycle hum whenever this is blended in. If this is fully blended in, as soon as I turn it down a little bit though, that hum becomes unnoticeable, but you still have that nice blend. Versus so I'm really happy with how that came out. This switch though, sometimes it's a little bit hard to pull. If you press down at all at the same time you try to pull it up, it gets a little tough. That's just, switch pots are not as good as dedicated switches. But it seems to be working well enough that I'm not going to sweat it. This is a nice sounding guitar now. It took me a long time to get the pickup height balanced just right. And I cannot show you the GB bender on here, both because I'm a total amateur at such things and because the Glazer system, which is incredible. This is by far the best engineered B-bender system I've ever encountered, and I've dealt with quite a few. It's for a Schaller strap button, and I have it's done for the Dunlop strap button. I only have the Schallers, so I don't have a Dunlop strap button that'll attach to this, and the owner didn't provide his strap. So I can show you that it does work, and it does go. I've set it so that it gives a full major second if you pull it up. But that's all I can do. So later I'll show this with these noiseless pickups versus my old faithful with the traditional pickups. And I think after last Sunday's stream, with a lot of help from the people who are in the audience Sunday, I got most of the kinks worked out of the audio issues I've been having. Obviously not all of them, but there were a few things I said in that stream that have been bothering me all week of minor note. This thing I said had a self noise of 13 dBA weighted. It's actually 9, so that's even better. The 4100. And there was another thing I said that I don't recall now, but the major thing that's been bothering me all week and it is a major thing, as you'll see, is there was a chord, the James Bond chord, and for some reason my brain kept, I don't know whether my brain was even active. I was watching it back, I'm like, you moron. I kept saying major, minor 7. It's clearly a minor with a major 7, add 9 if you're interested, because a major with a minor 7 is just a straight up dominant chord. So if the chord I was describing was a major minor 7 with add 9, you're just talking about an E9 chord. It's obviously a minor chord add 9 with a major 7. So and I even after saying, hey, that's the minor 3rd, and that's the 5th, and that's the major 7, and that's the 9, so I identified major 7, I identified a minor 7, I still, minor 3rd, I still said major 3rd, minor 7, just because sometimes the brain mouth disconnect is great. Anyway, let's put this to the side and get to everyone's questions. But that stuff I said, getting the chord name wrong, is, I hate being wrong in public when I could have been correct. And in my mind, I was correct. It just, by the time it came out of this stupid thing. Let's see here. Thank you very much, David K. A pint of Doom Bar. Oh, that sounds so good. Next time I get back to the UK, I will take you up on that, David K. Thank you. Doom Bar and London Pride were two of my biggest finds, my absolute favorites on that trip. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone being here. Joshua Stevens, send your wife my apologies. Can I replace a speaker in a Vox AC15C1 with an 8 ohm? Scorty asks. Yes, you can. The AC15C1, I'm turning off the amp and some stuff here, has a switch on the back, an impedance switch, so you can select 8 or 16. The stock internal speaker is a 16 because it makes it easier to pair with an external 16 ohm cab, because then you can use the internal and the external, just set it to 8 ohms. But if you want to use an 8 ohm speaker in there, that's fine. Put it in the cabinet and set the impedance selector switch to 8 ohms and make some music. Victor is here. We can commence. Aloha, Victor, and mahalo for being here. Hey, Tor, he just picked up a 68 trainer YGA 1A signature for the 600 Canadian. He can't think of a better amp, even at triple the price. My question is, can I modify it with a master volume? First of all, Tor, good. I'm glad that you found something you like. Second of all, I am not immediately, top of my head, familiar with the YGA 1A circuit. I've only had 3 or 4 trainer models in my experience, and it's hard for me to remember their names because they're all YG something. So I don't know what the YG A1A signature really is, but all that aside, almost any amp can have a master volume installed. Sometimes there are amps that don't benefit from it. If you have an amp with, say, a cathodione follower, a phase inverter without many gain stages ahead of that in the preamp, you add a master volume. It's pretty much just like turning the volume pot down that's already on the amp. You just lose a lot of gain as you turn it down. But almost any Class AB amp, especially those with a long-tailed pair, phase inverter or cathodione phase inverter where there is substantial gain coming from the preamp, you can install a post-phase inverter master volume. Teletastic face red heart shape. I don't see the emoticons on here, for which I'm grateful. I despise emoticons and all that, the emojis and stuff, but I do get a chuckle, as I just literally chuckled, out of the text descriptions of said things that I don't see on here. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with you, Barry H., for using emoticons. It's just that I don't see them on here, and I don't use them myself, which bothers my wife. My wife uses them all the time, and lots of exclamation points and smiley faces and hearts and stuff. And she'll send me this really flowery text message with 90% emoticons and emojis and stuff, and I'll text back, sure thing. It's the same as the 60s YBA-1A, just with tremolo instead of range controls. Well, I don't remember the YBA-1A, and I might have one on my channel. I might have played it. I just don't remember the model name. But tremolo sounds like a good thing to have instead of range controls. So, in general, most Canadian techs are more knowledgeable on trainers than most American techs. I'm sure there are people in the Buffalo area and the Detroit area who have a lot more experience with trainers than most American techs. It's just due to the way heavy, expensive things and borders have always operated, trainer has not had a huge impact on the American market, so we just don't see many of them. But the ones I have seen tend to be quite good. Hey, Casey Hood, you're asking the million-dollar question. Had a Hot Rod Deluxe that burned a screen resistor, then a year later had to reflow the tube sockets to the board. What amps have the Hot Rod Deluxe clean tones with better reliability? Well, Casey, people will talk about how the Hot Rod Deluxe is Tweed inspired. It's not, or that it sounds just like a 60s Fender. It does not. There's some oddities to that circuit. The closest thing on the market to the sound of the Hot Rod Deluxe is the PV Classic 50. But it has many of the same reliability issues. Doesn't catch on fire quite to the same level as a Hot Rod, but that's the closest circuit. But in terms of just a really good, clean Fender sound, which is what most people get from a Hot Rod DeVille, the Fender reissue series, the 65 reissue series in particular, are really good choices. But Hot Rod Deluxe, if you have a 1x12 or a 2x12, you know, how loud do you need it to be? If you're used to playing at 50 watts, and you need that big volume for big stages, the Deluxe Reverb may not get you there, though the sound is great, but the level won't be there. A twin, on the other hand of things, could be too loud for many stages. So try the various amps in Fender's 65 series if you want to have the best of all possible worlds and can pay a little bit more, but not a lot more than what the 65 reissue Deluxe Reverb goes for new. The Sir Bella would be a really good choice. And Fender has the 68 Pro Reverb amp out now, which is not anything to do with the actual Pro Reverb from the 60s, but it is basically a 40 watt 1x12 single channel 60s Fender circuit with reverb and trem. Any of those would get you equivalent sounds to the Hot Rod Deluxe without all the long-term reliability issues. And you also don't have that volume that goes from nothing to really freaking loud instantly. Hey, Surge98, when a 2 or 3 watt resistor is required, where should you use metal film and where should you use metal oxide? Thanks. In my practice, for things which are unlikely to ever see a tremendous failure, but I want to have a value that does not change with very low mass, I tend to use a metal film. Like you'll see me use metal films, 2 watt metal films in a Fender 60s or 70s Fender Doghouse. You know, so for the dropping resistors in the power section, I will use metal films there. I could also use metal oxides, but equivalent wattage tend to be larger with a little more mass. But those are situations where, unless something really catastrophic happens with the capacitors, there's never going to be any real big current there. So the 2 watts is way overkill already, because a 1 watt would do it, a half watt would do it. So by going from a half watt carbon resistor, either composite or film, to a 2 watt metal film, I know that I've got really, you know, it's going to stay that value. It's rated for way more current, way more heat, way more voltage than is ever going to be subjected to. So it's a good choice. But on the screen grids of an output tube, I use 3 watt. I'm not using metal oxides, though I have metal oxides are also a good choice. I use wire wounds, because you have to say, this is the operating condition this resistor will normally have, but when a tube dies, because tubes are the weak link here, if the tube dies in such a way to cause a short and there's way too much current being drawn through that resistor, how will that resistor handle that? What are its burn characteristics? And so if you expect the resistor is likely to burn at some point in its life, probably at the very end of its life, then you want to choose something which burns gracefully. And that's where I will go for a metal oxide or a wire wound. And I can use a metal oxide in that location, but the wire wounds on the market tend to have less mass. And when you have a resistor suspended up in the air between two pins on a tube socket, that lower mass is nice. But I could use 2 and 3 watt Zycon metal oxides for every resistor in the power section of one of these amps, and it would absolutely sound fine and work perfectly. I just go to preference. I like the little Pro 2 series Vichys because they kind of have the right color for the old carbon comps in the power section, and I go with the Vichy AC and PAC series wire wounds for the screen grids. They're pretty, and that matters to me, but you can use just whatever Zycon, Coaspire, 2 and 3 watt metal oxides if you prefer. That's a long answer to a simple question. That's why you come here to hear me ramble about esoterica. Hey, Andy, no problem. Yeah, Dave knows everything about speakers, it seems. I think talking when I speak to David about speakers, it's like the cartoon version of how I think most people feel talking to me about amps, because, oh, you pulled the string and now the monkey's kind of banged the cymbals, because we have all this stuff stored up, and if someone actually asks us, we're like, oh, you want to know this? Here's the fire hydrant. But he really knows this stuff, and he doesn't spend any time on forums. He's too busy actually gaining experience and using things. It's a weird mindset these days. Hey, TC, bought an AC15 after watching my channel. Hope it's working well. You traded yours in when buying a 61 reissue Strat. Want another one. I don't blame you one bit for getting the Strat. What's my opinion on the AC15, AC30 heads with the power attenuation? It's going to be a seemingly contradictory opinion. The circuit is there. The circuit is well done, and it is reliable, and it does work for a non-reactive load. It's a very well implemented non-reactive load that in my fairly extensive heat testing has not had any stress, and it's reliable, and it's there, and it's not much more than buying the amp without the circuit. But for modern needs, I think there are better options on the market external. So if I wanted to use an AC15 or AC30 head, I would get it not because of the attenuator. I get it because I wanted a head, and I already have a bunch of cabs, and I just want one more head. I don't need another whole combo. And it's very useful that way. You can take it, have an AC15 head with a 1x12 for small gigs, a 4x12 for big gigs, whatever you need to do. But to me, the attenuation would not be a selling point for the amp, but neither would it be a reason to avoid that amp, because it's pretty much thrown in free of charge. I would look at the SUR reactive load, or the SUR reactive load with IR. Fractal's got a real nice reactive load as well. These are better attenuators that are starting at $300 and going up to $600. So yeah, you spend more, but it is better. But then you have that, you can use it with your AC15, your AC30, your deluxe reverb, if you have a Marshall, you could use it with multiple amps. So Vox did a thing well that other people on the market now are doing better, but Vox did it very inexpensively and reliably, and it works. So if you get that thing and it works for you, you don't need to feel compelled to go buy the better on paper thing like the SUR or the Fractal, but you could. So, just know that it is a good thing, but it is not a game changer. It is not the best attenuator possible. but it is a lot better attenuator than most amps had 10, 15 years ago. So it's a tough game to get into. Hey, Wes. Hey, Emilio. Hey, Dryfly1. What would cause a weak tremolo on a Princeton reverb? It is very quiet, but when I power it down, it sounds glorious. So as you power it down, it's sounding great. Well, it could be quite a few things. The tremolo in the Princeton reverb is affecting the bias. So there are a couple of things that could be going wrong. You could have just a weak tube that's driving the tremolo. I think it's V3, or might be. I think it's one of the triodes in V3. It might be one of the triodes in V4 that's driving that tremolo in the Princeton. In which case, if it's just giving a weak signal, it's not able to kind of. It's really hard to describe this without going into the actual technical terms, which no one understands. So here's the bias signal coming from one side to the intensity pot, and here's the tremolo signal coming to the other side of the intensity pot. And the center of that intensity pot is what actually gives the bias reference to the output tubes. And in theory, you just adjust that ratio of what's the signal that's coming from the tremolo to this steady bias that's coming from the bias supply, and then that feeds the tubes. Well, if this is steady and this is suddenly very weak, even if you turn the pot more towards this side of things, or this side of things, so that the center is being fed more of this than it is being fed of this is so proportionally weak that it doesn't do anything. But then, as you power the amp off, and this is still circulating, this bias begins to drop down, and all of a sudden you reach the more of a balance on each side, then you hear the tremolo. It could also be a bad, probably 100 nanofarad coupling cap on the output of the tremolo going to the intensity pot. It could be a bad 1 meg resistor going from the plate of that triode to that 100 nanofarad. It could be a weak thing in the cathode of that tube. But that's why it would sound good when you're turning it down. You also want to make sure the amp isn't biased too hot, or the tremolo can't really compete, or the tremolo will get thuddy. Typically, you'd want to be about 45 to 55% on a Princeton. Most people want to be as hot as you can get away with without the tremolo thudding. So I often send them out about 53% idle dissipation. Hey, Andy, can I describe my method for straightening faceplates? And thanks for the super chat, Andy. How thick are the steel plates I use and types of clamps? Any advice on dents to the chassis itself? The chassis dents themselves are tricky depending on where they're at. I'll show you the steel plates I use. So if I have a dent in a chassis and I can get in there with these, let's block my face. So I can, if I say it's in the faceplate, if I can get one on the inside and one on the outside with some paper towel on the front so it doesn't mar the finish or anything, and then get a C-clamp in and get around any lip that the chassis may have, this will undo a lot of dents because this is a lot thicker than the steel or aluminum of a chassis. And so for small stuff, I'll use these. For larger stuff, I've got some sheets of steel left over from various amps where the amp was toast, but hey, this had a real nice thick steel lid. I'll use that just to be a very strong, very flat surface, and I'll clamp them. And I have a stainless steel ruler, which I think is right here. Yeah, which also helps me spread out the load. So if that's on a table, like on a flat table in front below me, and then I have the faceplate here, and I've got this, and then I've got the clamp, that's really going to help. And if I needed to do more force than that, I use larger plates. But I always use these in the focal point where I'm focusing the force. I want to use either these or one of these going down to one of these or other steel plate on a sturdy table. So I know I'm really getting flat on both sides. I don't want to press it down at any kind of angle and cause an indentation. For the C-clamps, I'm using standard great big orange C-clamps that you can get from any hardware store. with the screws. So, you know, and fairly long, what do you call the bars on a C clamp where it slides and has balls on each end so you can get enough leverage to really get some force there. That's pretty much what I do. I think I've shown the rest of it in the videos. And the other thing is just patience. Sometimes you gotta clamp it there and leave it there for 15 minutes if it's an aluminum plate that's got some memory to it. And sometimes you've got to, you know, you focus on this little inch by inch square area, and then you move it an inch to the side, and you just kind of work around. So what might be start off as a big wide bend, you just kind of gradually bring it down. In theory, you would want to not bring it down flat. You want to bring it down to slightly convex from the top view, but you want it convex from the top by the same amount, and that's really outside the scope of what you can do at home. If you need that kind of stuff, you need to go to an actual machine shop which has actual presses. Most dents to the chassis, though, unless they're endangering the operation of the amp, they're really hard to undo, especially given that most chassis, like Fenders, which are the most commonly dented, have that, you know, so here's the bottom of the chassis, here's the faceplate, there's always that lip at the top, and it's really hard to get clamps around that lip. Hey, Daniel James, he wants gassing for 65 deluxe reverb reissue. Want to find one used and send it out to Alessandro to hand wire it. Have I ever got my hands on one of those builds? I'm curious of my thoughts. I have seen the Alessandro work. I've seen what you get for that, and you know, I wouldn't do that. I'll just leave it at that. I think you don't need to do all that. I think you're chasing the wrong thing at that point. And I'm not saying this because this is my videos. The videos I put out with how to make those things work, I put those out. That information is out there. I don't make any money off of it. So I'm not saying, hey, my way is the right way, but my way solves the problem. You put the stuff on the board that gets hot off the board, the screen grid resistors, the heater stuff. There's one trace on a deluxe reverb reissue that gets kind of noisy going from the wiper of the vibrato channel volume pot to pin 7 of V2. Just cut that trace at both ends and replace it with a shielded wire. You don't need to spend a ton to reinvent that entire wheel when the circuit itself really does sound very good, and you don't need to gut it and rebuild it. If you can, that's fine. I don't think that's the service that I would go for. But, you know, it will be a slightly different sounding amp with some other issues than the ones it started out with. Hey, Tor, will a 50 watt 8 ohm amp blow up a 16 ohm 30 watt cab? Yes, if you use it at any appreciable volume level for any amount of real time. Probably won't blow up for the first song of your set, but sometime before the end of the second set, it'll be toast. And if you play really hard, it probably won't make it through the first set. And it's an expensive way to find out, because you'd have a mismatch on the impedance, and you'd be giving sending way too much wattage to those poor speakers in the 30 watt cab. Let's see. $75 YBA here says, hey Tor, Golden Amps in LaSalle, Ontario, and Paul's Boutique. Sorry, every time I hear Paul's Boutique. In Toronto, both know Trainer quite well. Email them, and then shake your rumpa. And 75 YBA knows Trainers for some reason. Hey, Joe Bucci. What do I prefer more pertaining to the pots when using 50s wiring, audio taper, or linear taper for volume or tone pots on a Les Paul with humbuckers? Well, I never use linear taper on guitar tones, because if you use linear taper pots for the tone on a guitar, then all the tone change happens between 0 and 1, which means that it's like nothing, 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 dark. Nothing, 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 dark. I will most of the time only use audio taper or J taper, which are 20%, 30% taper pots, vintage taper, for audio and, for volume and for tone. The only time I'll use a linear for volume is if the guy is a jazz player and the amp will never have any gain and he just wants really fine control of so if you go from this to this to this, that is a very small change on the pot here on the telly, which has audio taper. I'll do it so you can see it. Let me take your text off the screen for a second, Joe. So, where is it? Where'd you go? Oh, there it is. So you can see the volume pot. All right, so on 10, turn it down the slightest bit. So into a very clean amp, which has no breakup, that very small movement on a volume pot with audio taper gives a pretty big drop in volume. Versus, whereas if there were a linear taper pot, that change that happened from 10 to 7 would happen from 10 to noon on a linear taper pot. So for a jazz guy, all that stuff is happening over a wider range of the pot, whereas for a rock guy, that's in a very narrow range of the pot. So it's really hard to do that fine control. But most rock, country, jazz, blues, most rock, country, blues, etc. guys are often wanting the amp to clean up as you turn it down as well. And this amp, this deluxe reverb is only on 2.5, so it's not going to exhibit any breakup. If I had this at 4 or 5, and I went from 10 on the pot to just down to 7, all of a sudden the amp would be a lot cleaner, but the volume level would not drop much because of the way amps behave and the compression built inherent in the amp. So for most players who play aggressive styles of music, the audio taper works better. You know, when you do the Van Halen thing where you have the dimed Marshall and you turn it down to like 1 and you have a clean sound. Through this Telecaster here, through this deluxe reverb here on 2.5, there's nothing there. If this were a dimed Marshall, that would be my clean sound. Same for Brian May. Versus through the clean amp. So it depends on the playing style, but linear taper pots are usually not a good choice for volume, and linear taper pots are always a terrible choice for tone for most people. There's a big argument to be said for audio taper there. And again, go to David Collins. Look up David Collins on YouTube. He's from Ann Arbor Guitars, and he's got a great series of stuff on how all these pot tapers actually work and why you would make a choice. So, but unless the guy's a jazzer, I never used linear at all. Robbie F., thank you for spending your time with me, man. Any recommendations to get tweed Bassman-like tones in a smaller package, TC says. It depends on what you mean by tweed Bassman-like tones. I've got a 58 Bassman right there. Most of what I would set that to do, I can get a sound out of the deluxe reverb that you might not recognize as being different, because there's what the amp is doing, what the speakers are doing. If I had I actually do in the other room have a Vibrolux reverb, which has 10-inch speakers. If that Vibrolux had 10-inch Alnico speakers like this Bassman does, I could get mostly similar sounds from that Vibrolux that I can get from the Bassman. Now, it's mostly. There are some sounds the Bassman gets that the later 60s amps don't get. And people think Bassmans have a certain sound because they're used to hearing people playing Bassmans very loud with like a tube screamer. And how is it mic'd on that recording, and what audio gear is used? So, TC, if you can give me the specific tonal references, I might have some help for you, because, you know, and also people hear with their eyes. So a lot of guys are going to say get a 5E3 Tweed Deluxe because it'll look like a small version of the Bassman. It'll look the part, sound and play completely different than a Bassman. The other answer, much shorter, is get a JTM 45 reissue. Put 6L6s in it, give it a master volume, and use it with a smaller cab. Nice elk hair caddis. That's my go-to strike indicator. Nice, Daniel. I miss fly fishing, though I know all about the dry hair caddis and all that. I was mostly fly fishing for bass around here, so a lot of streamers and mice and such. And I'll tell you what, the basses, the large bass around here have been so inundated with baitcaster and spinning rigs, and they know what a spinner bait or crankbait when it sounds like when it hits the water, and they don't hit that shit. You get out there with a real nice marabou streamer that looks like a minnow, and it's yours. Trouble is getting to it because you can't do a 300-yard cast. But anyway, it's fun. Hey, Daniel, I'll look for your email after this. Appreciate that. Yeah, I like that mini humbucker. Hey, sent to me. So you discovered the silver mica caps that are just labeled SM. Those are the generics. They tend to fail. You can use any of the silver micas made by CDM, or you can spend even more and get the ones that say Sozo on them. And if you really want the silver mica sound, you have to use the ones that are made by and say CDM. That's Cornell Dubilier. And you can get them at Mauser, and you can get them at DigiKey and other places. But I don't like the sound of silver mica as well as I like the sound of ceramic discs. And so I like the 1 kilovolt not Muratas. The Muratas are nice. I like that. That's a dipped ceramic. I like the 1 kilovolt Vichy 562R series. You can get that at Mauser. That's a class 2 ceramic, which is very appropriate for JTM 45. It's very similar to the stuff that Marshall was using in the 60s. It's also very similar to the stuff Fender was using in the 60s. And they happen to cost a lot less than the good silver micas. But I don't use them because they cost less. I use them because they sound right. Now, there's a very subtle difference between an amp which has good silver micas and an amp which has good ceramic discs. Some people will never notice the difference. Some people will. It's a feel thing. It's a harmonic response thing. But there's a huge difference between any of those good caps and the generic silver micas, because the generic silver micas tend to become microphonic, become noisy, and they tend to leak DC. And just because they're working for you now, there's no guarantee that they'll work next week. And I and other techs that I know have had such a dramatically high failure rate with those that they're replaced on site now. Hey, did amnesia? Solid state Dumble amp went back for service. That's the one with the bias burning up the standby burning up that cap you're talking about. Bought a 72 Bassman 50 watt. Need to replace some wires due to corrosion. Do I have a favorite solder? How do I remove old flux rosin death cap? Well, you don't ask for a lot on this, do you, did amnesia? Do I have a favorite solder? Yeah, I use some Kester 6040. That's in the description of all the videos the past several years. I can tell you what it tells you what solder I use. How do I remove old flux and rosin? I've got videos showing that. I think I've got a video specifically on like a 69 Vibro Champ where I really go into detail on that. But it's isopropyl alcohol and paper towels and a heat gun and a little a very small flat-headed screwdriver that I use to chisel away the old solder. It doesn't take any force. It just breaks up. How do I, and death cap? I remove the death cap in all the 60s and 70s amps I work on. So basically, watch my channel more, and you'll know all these things. Sorry, I don't mean to be flippant, but otherwise, the next 45 minutes are spent to telling you all that stuff specifically that I've already covered in hundreds of videos where I show the same information again and again. That's a good price for a 72 Bassman 50 watt. Don't mod it yet. Get it working the way you want it should, and see what it sounds like at that point. Then if you find anything's lacking from it, I've got a Bassman 50 video up from the 2 or 3 weeks ago where I showed where I did change the output to the AA864, but I left the preamp the same. So you can check that out, but you don't need to make mods to it. First thing is to get it working the way it was designed and see what you actually have. I have not heard the new Bagcat DC30 background noise. I hope it's great, but I have no experience with it or knowledge of it other than the fact that it exists. Open or close back cabs. Does pine versus birch ply matter if the cabs are otherwise the same? Yeah, they have different masses, they have different weights, they have different resonant frequencies. And there's a lot more variation in pine, so you can have one pine cab that sounds fantastic, and 5 that sound okay, and 2 that sound horrible. Or the math can vary, but it's random when you have pine, and birch ply is very consistent. Birch ply is heavier, but at the same time, it won't be as resonant. Open or closed back cabs, I have my preference, other people have their preference. Play a bunch and see what you like. Especially play one live. See how you like it live. That's the biggest thing. What's the output impedance of 59 Super Lead? Well, it can be 16, 8, or 4. There's a switch. Plum bum, and thank you very much. There's a switch. You select 8, 16, or 4 ohms. And so whichever cabinet you're using, that's the one you set the impedance selector to. So if you got a 16 ohm cab, you set it to 16. You have 2 16 ohm cabs, you set it to 8. You got an 8 ohm cab, you set it to 8. You got 2 8 ohm cabs, you set it to 4, etc. I'm sorry, input impedance. Read output impedance. I have got to get new glasses. All right, this is just getting terrible. This is like the 3rd chat in a row. I've got it larger on this screen, but it's smaller. The stuff where I'm seeing it coming in real time is larger. But the stuff on small, let's see if I can make this larger. I can make it larger there for you guys, but you can read that. I need to make it larger here. Does this do anything? No. All right, well. Input impedance of a 59 Super Lead. It depends on which input you're using. You've got a nominal input impedance of 1 meg on the hotter input of channel 1 or channel 2. You've got a nominal input impedance of 138K if you use the low gain input for channel 1 or channel 2. And then if you jumper channels, it gets a little bit crazy on the math. But all this is nominal. The real thing you have to remember is that 1 meg is just limiting the max input impedance of the grid, which otherwise would be in the tens of megs, which slightly lowers the high frequency response. Not to any appreciable level to us, but for radio frequencies, it's nice. The real impedance of an amplifier input stage is set by this and the pickup, because when I have this guitar on and I'm on the bridge pickup, say this thing's got an 8K output because it's a hot tele bridge. Say let's say 8K. Well, that 8K is in parallel with 250K. So 250K in parallel with 8K, you're probably like 7.2K. And then you plug into the input of an amp which has a 1 meg input resistor. 1 meg's in parallel with the 7.2. So we might have, at the time that you're playing, the input of that tube has got a 7K path to ground. That's its impedance at that point. it gets complicated when you're talk about input impedances of audio devices. Usually there's a capacitor which separates the impedance of whatever is feeding it to the impedance of the circuit itself. So you could say, all right, whatever the source impedance is, there's a capacitor there, so it's not going to couple to and affect the actual impedance of the next device in the circuit. In most guitar amps, you don't have that on the inputs, so they're tied together. Otherwise, you could say, all right, I want the output of this to be much lower than the input of the next device. And so let's say that the nominal output impedance of a guitar is 10K. That's probably an industry average right now. It might be a little bit lower. And then if you have an input impedance on the amp that's nominally 1 meg, that's a really good load for this. Otherwise, pickups get loaded down. If I were to plug the same pickup into an amp which had we'll just go into the low gain input, 138K, it darkens the sound of the pickups. Well, Sun Tzu, that's if you're talking about going into both channels at the same time. But a jump ring, you go into one channel high input, and then you go from the low input to the other channel's high input. And so you've got some funky math with that. But if you're just using an ABY box, you're correct. Sorry, input impedance is very different than output impedance, isn't it? I was wondering why you're asking that. Well, Matambale, yeah, audio taper pots are for tone circuits in a guitar. I'm specifically talking about the behavior in a guitar, where the way pickups are loaded and the way that the tone circuit affects the resonant peak of the pickup. If you're talking about in an amplifier or any other audio path, the impedances are very different. You're not going to have the same issues, and so it's very common to use a linear taper tone circuit in an amp or other audio, electronic circuit. In a guitar, linear is not your friend for tone due to the way pickups behave. Now, that might be if you have EMGs or other active pickups, or you have some other system where you have active pickups in a buffered preamp that's in the instrument, like many basses. Linear is fine, but I'm talking about Telly's, Strats, 335s, and I think the question specifically was about a Les Paul. So there's a lot of factors, like, sometimes I read input as output. So the trouble with that Portuguese dessert, you printed the recipe out. If you're talking about pastéis de nata, you can't make them. I'm not saying you can't make them. No one can make them except pastéis de Belém. And I think 4 people on the planet have the recipe. What have I been listening to lately? I've been listening to songs. Just for Fears, Sowing the Seeds of Love a lot the past couple of days, because I'm in love with the EQ and the air on the voices, and so I go through periods of listening to certain things again and again. Not that long ago, I was listening to Hejira by Joni Mitchell again and again and again. I went through a Fountains of Wayne, Welcome Interstate Managers period a couple months ago, and I still got all those tunes stuck in my head. I love that stuff just because they're these elaborately detailed stories about nothing, but they're the common day things that everyone experiences that no one thinks about are given this weight and stature of being the focal point of a really clever pop song. And it's kind of a little bit Edward Hopper, and it's a little bit Steely Dan, and it's a lot the Cars. It's just really interesting to me how the guys in Fountains of Wayne were able to elevate the everyday and just transcend. Right now I can't remember his name. The bassist, fantastic songwriter, Adam. He did That Thing, the music for That Thing You Do. He wrote that song for the movie. He's done a ton of stuff. Brilliant songwriter. Died way too young. The very early weeks of COVID. And I know that my heart was not the only one broken. but his music's still there, and I still keep finding things in it. And Mike Viola is kind of an adjunct to that. I listen to stuff all over the place. That's why I was picking up on Paul's Boutique earlier. Hey, I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but please only ask any one question the once, because it's really hard when I'm looking at the chat and I see the same question I've already seen, and I think, oh, did it scroll up? Am I in the wrong place? Did it go back to where I was? It throws me off. What tips do I have for lead dressing? Let's go. So I put that in so many videos. Basically, the goal is you want to keep all grids away from all heaters, and you want to separate triode stages from each other as much as possible, so that the wires going to V2B are not close to the wires going to V3A. Beyond that, if you have a whole bunch of stuff going to a tone circuit on the front panel, it can be helpful both for keeping things neat and for isolating that from other audio signals around them to twist them together like you find in a Fender. It's not necessary, but it does help. There's the stuff you do in lead dress which makes things sound better, and there's stuff you do in lead dress which makes the amp less full of clutter and spaghetti. So you can look at it and say, that's this, and that's this. And from a text perspective, that's just as important as making it sound good. It has to sound good first. That's the most important at all times. But then it needs to be a logical layout, so that if you get hit by a bus and someone else has to fix the damn thing, they have a fighting chance of figuring out what's going where and why. I'll do other things that are beyond the scope of this chat right now, but you'll see them in my videos from time to time. And in general, when I do something unusual about lead dressing, I'll bring that up in the videos. Where were we? Control pot follow-up. If one wanted to roll off all tone very quickly, what would be the best taper for that? Well, the roll-off very quickly would happen the same regardless of whether using linear or audio. You just, when you roll up, you'd hear a nicer sweep with audio. Here's audio sweeping up. And if I were a better tele player, I could do that Roy Buchanan stuff. I need to clean that pot, apparently. It's got a little bit to it. That's the trouble with using guitars. They get dirty. But if I want to roll off real fast, it's not so much the taper, it's when I say resistance, I don't mean the impedance, the DC resistance of the pot. I mean, how much torque does it take to turn the pot? And so what a lot of tele guys do, because tele guys like to roll the volume down a lot and the tone, is I use very low taper pots, low torque pots. So if I'm playing, so it's at the speed of a pinky. That's all there is to it. And if one little squirt of deoxit and this guitar would come to life, as far as that little bit of noise on the tone circuit works. Bass. The bass is up on the wall for today, Pastor. What is a good spot for bass in Memphis? Well, there's no good spot for bass in Memphis. But all around Memphis are so many lakes and rivers. Depends on what you want. You go up to, if you go up into mountains of East Tennessee, there's a lot of good smallmouth. And if you go up into the Ozarks, there's a lot of smallmouth. And there are rivers that start out where you're going to find a lot of smallmouth, and then it's going to transition to trout as you go farther upstream and the water gets colder. And you go farther downstream, it turns back to largemouth and catfish. So pretty much for all some of the oddities of the cultural moment, the land in Arkansas is gorgeous. The land in Eastern Tennessee is gorgeous. The land in Western Tennessee is mostly flat, a little bit of hills, but it's mostly farm, and it's not quite as the splendor, though there is good fishing. But you go up to Reelfoot for crappie, you go down to Arcabutla, you can go. I usually go over to Arkansas. I like being up in the mountains whenever possible. So whether you're going to go up to the White River or the Spring River, there's great fishing to be had in beautiful environments. And I'm not the kind of fisherman who gets in the bass boat with a cooler and a boombox or anything. I'm walking the bank or wading, and I want quiet. I want it to be just me and the herons at dawn. Not the Roland Martin approach. What do I think about the Bassman cabinet? 2x12 pine, too big for today's gigs. Hey, Brad, didn't mean it is a big cab. I got a brand new one from Mojotone in the other room for Merrill Aldridge when his Bassman is finished. So he'll have a matching cab. It is a very large cabinet, and when I'm done with that, you can listen to that video and see what you think. But it is about 20 to 30% larger than the 2x12 I use all the time, which is done to the dimensions of an Ola AC30, kind of without the top valence, kind of the internal dimensions. And I like this. This is my ideal size. It's not too dissimilar in size from a twin reverb 2x12, but you can certainly do bigger. All right, we've got just a few more minutes. So you guys heard the white telly at the beginning. And so far, so good, Brad. And this is one which has the passive pickups from Murray. And aside from that 60 cycle hum, so I'm quite pleased with this, and I can deal with the 60 cycle stuff. Though I do really like that neck humbucker, which is the thought process that leads us to have more than one Telecaster shaped object. Dang it. Thank you very much, sent to me. That was very kind of you. Appreciate that. We are coming up on the top of the hour where we'll do our first 7-minute break. But we're going to a few more. I have no experience with phase amps out of Canada. Sorry, NB. Let's see. Any recommendations for a humbucker-sized Filtertron, or would do the conversion rings for the TV Jones fit in a PRS? I would ask TV Jones. I would say TV Jones is the man or is the company for Filtertrons today. And I know that he's got some that are humbucker size. I think Lawler might as well. But I don't know if it fit in a PRS because I've never had a PRS here for installing Filtertrons in a conversion ring. I bet TV Jones is the person to ask, or Paul Reed Smith, or his representatives. If I have time, my thoughts, if any, on the new Marshall Studio JTM 20 head. It's a $400 amp being sold for $1,900, and if you like that, that's great. But it's a $400 amp being sold for $1,900. I guess we'll take. I think we're going to go to our 7-minute intermission, and when we come back, we'll get to Adrian Zimmerman's question. So I'll see you guys in 7 minutes. those of you listening on headphones, we're back. I don't want to scare you this time. Or do I? Mwahahaha. I have the microphone. I have the broadcast capability. Let's get back to people's questions. Hey, Adrian. Thank you for being a first-time caller, and especially thank you for being a long-time listener. Last week, when talking about modelers, I said I have some of the Neural DSP plugins. What do I think of the product? Thanks. Well, I have one. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Let's see. That is called. Sorry. The where is it? Neural Amp Modeler. And I have used it, and I have found one or two sounds that are available publicly that I like, models that I like, and an awful lot that I thought were just loathsome, just really, really bad. So I have limited experience because I was only dabbling at that point, and I wanted to check it out because the free Neural Amp Modeler plugin had just come out. I've got a really nice AC-15 and a pretty good JTM-45. And then there was just a bunch of stuff that sounded horrible. And it's the same problem that affects Tonex, where you go out there and you download all these sounds and models that people have done, captures that people have done. I think a lot of people are just deaf or have terrible taste, and so you find the good ones, and then they're great. And so it's capable of being great. But I've not focused on the Neural Amp stuff because I don't have any way to play that live. I only can do it through the plugin, and I've got the HX Stomp and I've got the Tonex. I don't think I need to have the Neural box as well. And the reason I need to have it able to play live is for if I use it in a stream like this, maybe later I'll switch over to the modeling stuff. I have to hear myself, and because with the plugins I'm using, there'd be like a 30 millisecond or longer delay of latency, and so when I try to play, it screws my head up. Now, if I'm just tracking with the Neural DSP stuff, or tracking with the Tonex or the HX Stomp built in as a plugin, then I can turn the latency way down, and then it's not noticeable. But for a live stream, it's horrible. What the fuck is Brad talking about? Phase kicks ass. Great amps. Well, I'm gonna go with Brad on that, Steve. No offense, but if Brad's looking at their gut shots and they look like amateur uncle granddad built horseshit, they are. It doesn't matter how you. It's a tough thing when a tech looks at an amp. They see naked emperors most of the time. We seem to have a lot of those in the world these days. So I think anyway, back to the question, I think the NAD stuff is really good, but it depends on the models you have. Well, I hope your phase amps work forever for you and that you always love them, Steve. I'm just saying, we have to call them like we see them. What's my opinion on relic guitars? Well, I'm not a big fan of relic guitars overall. I tend to relic them myself. I've got some dings here and there from actually using the damn thing. And all my guitars that I've had for some period of time have them. The only relic guitar I have is the K-Line Springfield. And I would not have chosen that to buy that guitar with relic. I would have chosen to buy one of his new ones. But that guitar was just so damn good that I would have been a fool to let it go just because it had a few relic dings. And his dings are very realistic. You can see that video on that. It's not over the top. It's the ones today that, 90% of the top is worn away, and it's like custom color over sunburst and stuff that you just never really see in vintage guitars, or wear patterns that are more extreme than Stevie Ray's number one. Stevie Ray's number one is about as worn as most of them ever got, and I see brand new relic guitars that are 10 times more relic than Stevie Ray's. I guess the all-time relic champ, realistically, would be Rory Gallagher's. That like spent time in a flooded ditch and had like one little patch of original finish left, but it still doesn't look fake. I prefer just to have a new guitar and all the dings are mine, or a used guitar where all the dings were honest. But if you like relic guitars, go for it. Relicing amps is fortunately not a thing. I have done things like on that Rust Bucket, was it called? The Rust Bucket Bassman had on the channel, or Super Reverb, whatever it was, where I had to tear the whole thing apart and get all the rust off, and it needed new knobs, and the shiny new knobs didn't match anything on the amp, so I did age those knobs, and that. So I have reliced an amp in that sense, just so that they didn't stand out as a shiny new thing against a whole bunch of patina. But I would not do that to make a new amp look like that. That was a special case where I had an amp that's a miracle I was able to make it come back to life at all, but it still was going to look old and used, and it needed new knobs. So I made old new knobs with a lot of rolling them around in a cup full of sand, and a lot of coffee grounds and instant tea and tea soaks and all that stuff. And then I made some mud and really embedded the mud into the whole thing, and then wiped off all the mud. And what I couldn't wipe off all of it, so there were little bits in the grooves and stuff. It really came out well, and getting the shine off the chrome bit in the middle. Hey, Bill Levon, I'm glad that worked for you. The essence of good songwriting is bringing forth the universal experience with great clarity. That sentence started off differently, and now I'm not sure where the hell I just went with it. Welcome to my brain. You and I will get along just fine. Yes, Steve, I am a coffee drinker. I'm apparently a pretentious coffee drinker, but I'm okay with that. I was using a Variac with a Marshall. Safe. Is there a certain voltage range to stay within? I've read lots about EVH using one at lower voltage. Thanks. Well, the trouble with EVH is he got bored in interviews. Now, everything I'm about to say is true. It doesn't mean that I don't admire him, but he was the most famous guitarist in the world at a time when he was also being given all the cocaine in the world, and he was being asked the same stupid questions by every interviewer again and again. And so he got bored, and he was high and just wanted to fuck around with people. So he would lie. And so he would tell people, yeah, he's a Variac. I turned up to like 150. So he would tell people he turned his Variac up. He actually turned it down. There are other things that he did that are not quite safe. I'm not going to get into some arguments with some currently popular theories, but he would turn his Variac down, sometimes to the point where he would kill his tubes because the heater voltage would be too low. And he was using very, very high quality tubes that aren't available today. We cannot get those old Sylvania and Phillips 6-7 CAs that he was using, and he had tons of them on the road. Brad's not pretentious. Brad is the least pretentious guy I know. Come on, man. If Brad is not trying to make his ego better, he's trying to save someone from buying a bad amp. I'm gonna go with Brad on this. If that makes me pretentious too, I'm fine with that. So to answer your question, there are things that Eddie did, and he only had to make it through one show because his tech could change the tubes out for the next show, and that'd be very expensive for the rest of us. And a lot of the stuff that he did that he got away with the old high-quality U.S.-made 60A7s, you won't get away with current production tubes. So you can turn down, I would say 90 is about as low as you would ever want to go. You want to watch your heater current, not heater current, your heater voltage. Make sure your heater voltage doesn't drop below about 5.5. 5.7, 5.8 is even safer, but 5.5 is about borderline on that. And you want to make sure your bias is still correct or within the desired limits as you turn that voltage down. Because as you turn the mains down, your bias will change. You need to chase that. So you don't want the heaters to go too low unless you can have a big stash of tubes and a tech and can change them out for the next show. So between Eddie being bored and just fucking with people in his interview answers, and Eddie having a ton of money and still having really high quality tubes available in abundance, it's a tricky thing for people to chase. Where were we? What works for edge lift on Mojo Tone Dijon caps? Yeah, some of those caps like to plead, like to peel up. I've not tried to do anything about them, but I'm sure that a little dab of super glue would glue it back down. Can I guide you to putting a bias mod in your 93 Blues Deluxe, American Steve? The reissues came with a bias pod on them. I want that. I have the schematic. Well, basically, you look at where the original schematic varies from the reissue, which does have the bias pod. But the first thing to do is just measure the bias of your existing amp with the wall voltage that you would normally use. 120 volts would be nominally optimal. And see if you need to, because those amps, the bias is the least problematic thing about them, and because of the nature of the way they're built, they're very prone to failures due to heat. So it can be very good to have a low bias on them, say 45%. So if you're at 47% with stock, with 120 volts coming out of the wall, you may not want to chase adjusting the bias, because if you wanted to go hotter, you're more likely for other things in the amp to start a cascade failure point. If you want to improve your Blues Deluxe, before you deal with bias, you want to make sure that the 5-watt diodes, Zener diodes, and 5-watt resistors have been replaced off the board, mounted higher off the board with some new components, because they're notorious for breaking those traces. And there's a resistor, I can't remember the R number, 60 something, over by the effects return, effects loop jack that often charge the board. And you want to make sure that the screen grid resistors are also replaced with new ones elevated off the board for heat flow. You often want to reflow the octal sockets for the 6L6s, and the plate resistors in the phase inverter are notorious for failing in the Blues Deluxes and the hot rods. So I would do all that first, and then make sure all your solder joints are good on the pots and the input jack. Maybe replace the input jacks with some switchcraft input jacks. And then if you want to do the bias, you'd be familiar enough with the amp to do that. But an awful lot of amps like that are fine with a kind of a cool bias. Mesas are biased anywhere from 15 to 35%, and they don't have any adjustment. People just love those things. Hey, Bill. Yeah, if he biased it sanely at 117 volts, you're probably fine at 120. You might have a slight change, but if he biased it on the bleeding edge, like 72% at 117, you might be too hot at 120. It's probably absolutely safe to use at 120. But down the road, plan on checking that out. Daniel Ramirez has got a great 5E3 clone. It can be a little too loud for a living room. Do I recommend I purchase the Champ? A buddy can sell me one that's a year old for $650. I think there are better. Low voltage, low wattage options than a Champ today. For practice, I would, for living room practice where Tweed Deluxe, which can be very lovely sounding at low clean volumes, is too loud, I would seriously consider a modeler for practice with headphones or small speakers. Like if we switch over to the modeling and show you what my point. Before I do that, here's the Deluxe Reverb, which is equivalent in level to the 5E3 Deluxe for clean. And here's the same thing with the volume turned down. And that is lower in level in the room, and I'm sure on playback here, you may not be able to hear it at all, than any level that you'd use a champ for. And so if you just need to hear yourself a little bit, your 5E3 can do it. Just turn it down and find exactly where you need it to be. That's really low in volume, but you can also do what I'll show you. Just give me a second to set this up. Turn this off so you don't get a pop. Well, I am glad that Steve and Brad seem to be coming to some kind of mutually agreeable place, but I know that both of you are coming at it honestly. Things typed at each other. Things typed have a different impact than things said different interfaces. That we can say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. What I mean is, I didn't mean that. I can hear myself. That would help. Hear myself. That would help. How's that? Audio doubling. Why is audio doubling? Why is audio doubling? Huh. It was working just perfectly for me before. Let's see. Where's the gate setting coming from? Is it gate setting happening? Input 2. Input 2. All right. Sounds like the stream is corrupted. Weird. You could only be when I speak like this, everything's fine. When I speak like this, everything's fine. Everything's fine here. When I speak, it's bad just now. Because I have the audio off. I mean the that's weird. Just 1 second. Okay, I didn't change anything, and now it's good. Okay, that's weird. It must have been a YouTube thing. All right, let's try this again, because on my end, everything looks fine. I've got a gate on what I'm hearing for myself, which is just the output of the Tonex. So how's this? Was that okay? Nope. Bad again. Nope. Bad again. Why the fuck is that bad? How's the voice? How's the voice now? Bad sound again. What the fuck? I'm not using OBS. See, I think one of the problems I'm having right now is people are saying things at different times. So as I speak now, Do you hear any problem? Right now, you should be hearing the guitar with echo. And if I do this, you should not have any echo or any stuttering on the guitar. Then I'll go this. You should hear it. No, no. All good and clean. So that was okay? All right. I did not make any changes. That's weird. That's really weird. All right. So this is the thing that I tested yesterday, and it was working just fine. And I have not made any changes on my end. So the audio thing must have been out there in the world or whatever. I don't know. I have to investigate this. Anyway, my point being that the beginning of the stream you're hearing me plugged into an actual 1965 deluxe reverb, not a 65 reissue, an actual 1965 deluxe reverb, which is loud in the room. But for practice, this is pretty good. And I'm hearing this much lower in volume through my speakers now than you would if you were watching TV, where I could plug headphones in and no one would hear it around you. And I'd rather have these sounds and the ability to change these sounds than have a champ that I could not turn up in the living room. If I wanted to give you guys some reverb. And I'm not saying that the Tone X or the HX Stomp is as good as plugging into an actual amp. In fact, I would tell you that is not the case. But what I can tell you is that compared to every other practice option or low volume option we've ever had in history, this stuff is amazing. So here is the HX Stomp's version of a deluxe reverb with some echo and delay. So let me turn off echo and reverb. So let me turn off the reverb on this thing. And here, and I like that, you know. Alex, can I help you out? So $600 for a champ just so you can practice in your living room seems to me to be a bad use of your money these days. If you already have a 5E3 Deluxe, you can just go into that and turn the volume down as well. But if you're really, you know, if I were trying to sound as good as possible for practice while my baby was sleeping in the next room and I was in a very small apartment, this would kill a champ. Now, a champ is more fun to play. I'm not saying that a champ doesn't feel better. I'm saying that pragmatically, to practice, to hear something that makes you enjoy using this stuff at home, this makes more sense to me than a champ. The other extreme, like Sentimi said, is get an aux box. So then you just plug your 5E3 into that, and it doesn't have to be the aux box. It could be the SUR reactive load with IRs, et cetera, et cetera. You can have all these sounds either by taking your existing amp into a relatively expensive, good IR load, or you can just use one of these cheap little boxes. The Tone X is what, $300? You can get them used probably these days for less. HX Stomp, I'm sure you can get used for good prices. And this is, is this fantastic? Is this the best? No. But now that YouTube is not making my sound terrible, even though the settings here are the same that they were when it was terrible. Fuck you, YouTube. YouTube audio. That's a nice practice setup. So if you want to get it, spend $600 on a champ, sure. But what do you want it to do with it? That's my question, really. Because I'd rather have these options than just one champ that you still can't turn up as loud as a champ wants to be turned up. Best kit or project type to learn to do one's own basic amp repairs. Hey, Matt, I've talked about this a lot. Start with pedals. Always start with pedals. Start with things where you're not looking at many hundreds of dollars worth of investment. So things that will not be likely to kill you or themselves. They're not going to catch on fire. Stuff with low current, low voltage, and really work on that stuff. And if you need to, make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes at first. Make mistakes on something that costs you $60 total, where the mistake is, oh, I burned my finger with the soldering iron, or oh, I burned this pad, I'm out $40. As opposed to, oh, I touched the wrong thing and now I'm dead, or oh, I've connected this wire in the wrong place and now we have a fire. So, but beyond that, once you get past the pedals, start by building a champ. Tweed champ would be a good one to learn how to do it, or a Tweed 5E3, which is not that much more complicated than a champ, but the 5E3 is a much more versatile, useful circuit. It's bad again. I'm gonna have to listen back to this. I'm wondering if it's my stream, or if it's what's being done on the servers, because about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, the YouTube servers were having a lot of problems with this stuff. And when that happened, what I found was if I left the stream and came back to it, everything was fine. Yeah, what's the saying? So if you run into the weird audio, exit or reload the page, exit and come back or reload the page and see if it fixes it. And not everyone is watching live. Yeah, if you're not watching live, go up to the screen. There's a button that'll show, it'll show how far behind you are, and there'll be a little place you click to go back to live. It's nice for everyone to be at the same place at the same time. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. Let's see. Hey, Drew Snedden. To fix the ticking vibrato in a deluxe reverb reissue, do I follow the Fender service bulletin, number 9? I believe I do. I think that's the one where they talk about adding a 10 nanofarad or 20 nanofarad cap. I think the Fender service might show it across the 10 meg plate. I usually do it across the roach from that connection where the 10 meg resistor connects to the roach to the part that's tied to ground. But yeah, that's what I do to fix the vibrato that ticks. Usually don't have to do that in a deluxe reverb reissue, usually only in the old deluxes, but it's very possible to do to the reissue. Just the trick is you don't have a lot of exposed lead there, and so it's harder you can't get it in the eyelet, so you'd have to tack solder it or do very tiny bends around the existing lead. So it might be better to do it there across the 10 meg, because you'd be able to get to either side of that resistor better than you could to the two legs of the roach. Okay, good. Lawler does have the Gretsch stuff, and I forgot. Hey, Imak J, thank you very much. Yeah, the speaker reconing company is Halford Loudspeakers. HALFORD.com, halfordloudspeakers.com, HALFORD, loudspeakers.com. And that is Dave Halford, and he is an expert, and they don't repair the voice coils, they replace the voice coils. He takes care of the cone and the voice coil, and he's been known to fix a spider or two as well. Thank you, Matambale. But if you have questions, Imak, call Dave. He can explain everything he does, his approach, and he's going to have different approaches on different speakers too. But he sources the correct cones and all the correct stuff, and he'll also tell you that, hey, I can't fix that speaker, or at least I can't make it original because no one's made that particular part for 40 years, whatever. On the Mojotone DIY J1845 is a 220 microfarad cathode bypass cap along with a 820 ohm resistor on V1. Why would the builder not want to use the suggested 50 microfarad cap? Thanks. Well, I'm not sure who suggested 50 microfarad. The original values found in J1845s were either 220 or 330 microfarad, and I think they used them based on what they had lying around. They're interchangeable. The good news is you can use 50, you can use 47, you can use 22 microfarad. You're not going to hear any difference between a 220 and a 330 and a 22 in that spot due to the nature of the high pass that's happening there. It is so low. We're talking a difference between 7 ohms and 3 ohms, and 7 hertz and 3 hertz. So technically it's there, but that's in a frequency range that we cannot hear. With frequencies the guitar does not generate as intended sounds. You get some of that happening where your skin rubs on the strings, and they cannot make it through your output transformer, and your speakers can't reproduce it. Most speakers have a negative 3 dB point at 75 hertz. Some of them are at 55 hertz. 75 hertz, 55 hertz. All that's, so far above 7 and 3 hertz. It's just crazy. It's like people on top of the Empire State Building looking down at people on the ground. So you can use any value cap there above 22 and higher, you'll get the same sound. People use the same value Marshall did because it looks right. And Sun Tzu just said the exact same thing I did, much more succinctly. Well, I haven't kept up with all the NAD stuff. I know that they've got a whole bunch of, they just came up with a new one that every other guitar channel got the same week. But, I've got these two inexpensive ones, the HX and the Tone X, and if I really wanted to go into the modeling stuff more than just keeping my toe in that world or keeping around for a late night practice, I would go to Fractal, because I'd call Cliff and say, which one of your toys do I need, man? Let's see, trying to find another question. Just found a 90s Fender Super for 500. Do I think it's worth picking up? If it's the Super Reverb reissue, absolutely. Those are great amps, Hans. I have not had any Albion amps come in, JD, sorry. If it's popping input fuses, in terms of the mains fuse blowing, pull the power tube and pull the HT fuse and try again. And if it's still blowing the input fuses, you can take it to a tech. What's with the crown icon things in the chat? I don't know. I've seen that, and I think it's people who've commented the most on my videos, but I'm not sure. It's not that many people who are getting them, including people who I have seen all the time. I'm not sure what the crown thing is. I'm always seeing it on the left live view. I'm not seeing it on the on what I'm looking at from in the order that they come in. Any tips on getting the most out of the Vox AC30C2 onboard spring reverb? The best thing is the only mod you need to make to that is the stock tank isn't that great. Replace it with the Mojo Tone or MOD version, but it is a 4E or 8E. So you need to make sure it's the correct tank because that's a solid state reverb circuit. You can't use the one that you use in a deluxe reverb. But any of the medium decay tanks sold by MOD for that impedance, the E series, will be a big improvement over the stock, which is Belton Accutronics. Any experience with the Marshall Class 5? Way too much experience with the Marshall Class 5. I've had a client bring one in. I thought this thing is designed by someone who hates musicians. So I found the things to undo all that stuff, and I put that stuff on my Les Paul for him. And then all of a sudden, everyone in the world wanted me to work on their Class 5s. And I did that for a time, but I got so sick of them. And even my mods were things that you could do to make them actually make some kind of sound that's vaguely approaching music and less likely to hum. And things like, okay, the first two runs had the output transformer in the wrong orientation, and the output hum as soon as you power it on. Here's how you rotate that. They were really not built to last. They never sounded good, and they were not built to last. I would not advise anyone to buy one. If you have one, and the number one fault that they have, besides this, not sounding very good and the hum from the output transformer being oriented wrong, is I believe it's R6, 5 or 10 watt resistor up on kind of metal legs that was used in place of a choke, and the weight of that resistor is too much for the lead-free solder that they use, so that always cracks. So reflow that, take off all the old lead-free solder and put in some fresh solder there, and I would actually pull the board up and crimp the little legs over to give it some mechanical support before solder is applied. But in general, Class 5 was a cheap amp that has come and gone, and let it go. I have played the G&L ASATs. They're really good. I don't like them visually. Aesthetically, I don't like the headstock. I don't like the way the pickups are shaped. I don't like the pickguard shapes. I don't like the bridge shape. Functionally, they're great. Musically, they're great. They're really well built. I don't like the way they look. And is that shallow of me? Yeah, sure. That's half this game. If you love yours, you're absolutely right to, and you may love the way it looks, in which case you're also right to. I thought Jerry Cantrell looked silly with his G&L in those videos, but he sounded like the right hand of God in those Alice in Chains videos. So, who am I to argue with him with his silly little loopy headstock? Let's see. Hey, Milo316, thank you very much. You got a 6G2 clone, and the tube bias tremolo is running too fast with the speed very low. How would I slow it down? That circuit's got a 20 or 22 nanofarad, and then a 10 nanofarad, then a 10 nanofarad in the what's called the low frequency oscillator circuit, LFO circuit. 3 capacitors connected in series with different resistance from each junction to ground or to other points. The traditional Fender is 22 or 20, then 10, then 10. If you were to change the second one from 10 to another 20 or 22, 500 volt or higher cap, 630 volts is usually fine, you will slow down the minimum speed. You could even increase the first one from 22 to 32, or even 47, 33 or 47. Those are the things you play around with. The thing is, you have to remember is as you slow down the minimum, you are also slowing down the maximum. So what you can do, because you have a 3 meg pot and a 100K resistor there, all the minimum speed, the slow speed, is affected by that 3 meg setting. And the fast speed is affected by that 100K. So it's not uncommon for me to replace the 100K with a 68K or a 56K, which makes the max speed closer to what it used to be, even as low as 47K, while the minimum speed slows down a lot. So that's where you play around with those. Now, at the point where my audio was messed up, I am going to have to see what it was like on playback. I've not had the audio mess up for everyone before when it wasn't a problem on my end. The problem in this case seems to be either my ISP or YouTube servers. I suspect YouTube servers because I did a ping test before I did this stream, and I'm getting 130% of my planned speed, and my upload speed is just insane. And this is the 2 gig connections. I mean, I don't think it was on my end. It just happened at the same time that I switched from the amp to the digital stuff. So it scared me. YouTube probably hates Telecasters. Well, bad news, YouTube. Let's see. All right. Okay. Still getting through the people saying my audio is fucked up, or the audio is great, or the audio is fucked up, or the audio is great. All right. Let's see. A lot of that, which is great. I love to have the feedback. At least we didn't have feedback on top of everything else. Now we're to where I was showing the stuff. All right. Do I find the Blues Junior 4 LTD lacquered tweed with the Jensen to be a good amp for practice home use or small gigs? They're fine until they catch on fire, and they will catch on fire, just like all Blues Juniors will catch on fire. And they don't sound that great. The speakers, a lot of them have a bad speaker. If you got the one with the Italian Jensen, it's not so bad, but the ones with the C12N, C12K suck, and the previous generic made for Fender speakers sucked. But the cabinet dimensions really kind of hinder any of the 12-inch speakers from sounding good in a Blues Junior. Blues Juniors do sound good when they're working right, but the trouble is a deluxe reverb reissue sounds better for about the same amount of money and much less likely to catch on fire. I cannot tell anyone to get a Blues Junior because Fender has just bent over their customers for 40 years. And instead of giving them fixes for the amp, they keep the customers bent over and they get a handful of gravel. And they say, oh no, this is the 4 version. Last time you were enjoying the 3 version. Now we've got the 4 version. And the only thing that changes is slight cosmetic things that made their cost of production go down. There's some things here now where apparently they've got some versions of the 4 which are cathode bias. Some versions of the 4 are still fixed bias, but they're both called the 4. There's not a model change. And basically from what I can tell from talking to other techs, while the fixed bias version was biased 120%, which is way too hot for fixed bias, they have now biased the cathode bias version as if it were fixed bias, so like 50%, which is way too cold for a cathode bias amp. So I'm not a big fan on any level of the Blues Junior. If you have one and it works for you, that's great. Long may it last. Just statistically, it's not likely to. And for the money, you can get so many better amps. They're so expensive these days. Let's see. You may not know, but I was recently listening to ZZ Top's DeGeo, and the tones are amazing. Also read that Billy Gibbons went straight into the board, though. Is it really true? I don't think he. I don't think he did on DeGeo. I think that's all amps. I think the board stuff was the Rockman stuff that you get into with Eliminator. What's on DeGeo? I always forget. I like Tres Hombres and ZZ Top's first album in that period with Brown Sugar and all that. But I'm a weirdo who likes some of the best sounds of all time, not some of the stuff he did with the Rockman. Let's see. Oh, DeGeo's got some great stuff like I Thank You and I'm Bad Nationwide. I don't think that's direct at all. I'd be horribly surprised if that's direct, because that's not what direct sounds were really doing in that time. They might have had some stuff that was direct where they would just like overdrive a mic pre or a compressor and then feed it to another overdriven mic pre for a track on there. It's, like the Beatles Revolution trick. But I'm listening to that. I've listened to all those songs, and they sound very much like amplifiers. The stuff that he did that's direct, the Rockman stuff, that's very audibly Eliminator stuff, and Rough Boy and stuff after that. Because when DeGeo was done, the technology to really do stuff direct was not there. It was just overloading pre's. There might be some stuff on there that's like that, but those main sounds do not sound direct at all. Death doesn't screw up your career like it used to. Hey, sent to me, you asked your question about the V1 cathode on a Marshall 22 microfarad multiple times. Everyone, please only ask any one question once, because, and I see it, I think I'm in the wrong place in the chat. I've already seen this. I've already been here. I must have scrolled up by mistake. I've got this little thing down here. Says 3 question marks before any question, please. I don't want to be like nagging guy and have the screen full of all these nagging reminders, but it wouldn't be a bad thing for me to say, please only ask one question once. You can ask multiple questions, but only ask each question once, because it's really hard for me to figure out where I am when I'm seeing the same thing again. It's like glitches in the Matrix. Let's see. Let's see, where are we? Oh, it's just a super. No, don't get the super. The super reverb is great, but supers are not the same thing. Brad, I see why. I see the second question, because you're removing it from the YouTube stream, which displays what everyone sees in the YouTube stream. I'm seeing them in the order that they came in as an admin, so I see things that have been removed. I try if I see anything that's contentious that makes me think, why is that still there? Sometimes I'll check and see if it has been removed. But I see the whole thing here as it comes in. That's one of the reasons it's so nice if you guys would just ask the questions once. It's much easier for me to, because I'm seeing much more information here than you guys are seeing here. I've got so much stuff coming at me. It's hard to stay focused. So anything you guys can do to make it easier on me, it's very appreciated. Do I use a power conditioner in my work area? Not really, Joe. I have what's sold as a power conditioner. It's a Monster 2600 or something. I got it just because the feature that's useful at the time is that you could have this set of outlets power on, and then 30 seconds later, this other set of outlets would power on, and then it reverses when you power it off. And it's got a meter that tells me what the incoming voltage is and whether we have good ground and all that. So when I used to have it controlling power amp with speakers, I could turn off the power amp before turning off the Mackie mixer that was feeding it, so I didn't get a thud as I turned off the Mackie mixer and vice versa. And now I'm just using it as all the stuff here is plugged into that, so I know that I'm at 119 volts right now, 118 now. I've got a good ground connection, and if the wall voltage were to exceed 128, the whole thing powers off until the wall voltage comes back down. So it is some degree of protection in that regard. It is now not a power conditioner. I'm sure it's got a couple of little caps in there that help with minor filter things, but it's not a true power conditioner. Now, most people who think they're buying power conditioners are just buying outlet strips with a couple of ceramic disc caps added. A true power conditioner is a $3,000 to $4,000 proposition. Where were we? We're coming up on the second break. Trying to turn the chat into a competition. I prefer it if you guys would turn the chat into a composition. That would be great. But I have to hear what you're saying and doing too. It'd be great if we had some kind of musical collaboration here. Stock tank on a CC2 nowadays has Ruby tank. Well, that's good. That's a big improvement over the old Accutronics that they were using, Sun Tzu. But there's probably still using the long decay, and the medium decay sounds better. Sagest Owl reviews. What can be wrong with the deluxe reverb when I can hear tremolo ticking and the speed knob works, changes the speed of ticking, but intensity knob does nothing and tremolo is not working? Well, intensity knob not working, you're going to have usually you might have a bad intensity pot, but if you're hearing ticking, that there's a fix for that we mentioned earlier in the stream on putting a cap across the roach. But usually, you can hear tremolo ticking, but you're only going to have that ticking when the LFO is on, and if the LFO is on, the intensity pot would work. Is it a reissue, or is it an actual amp from the 60s or 70s? Can you tell me that, Sagest Owl? And we'll get back to that and other questions in just a few minutes. We're going to take our next 7-minute intermission. Everyone go stretch your legs or anything else that needs stretching. All right, we are back. Got all the amp stuff turned off now, and I'm just gonna noodle for my own enjoyment. Where was the next question? Am I looking forward to purchasing any gear in the future? Well, I just purchased this microphone, and I want to purchase another good, even better camera for the channel. And I need to get an audio interface with more inputs at some point down the road. But none of that stuff really is stuff that's of much interest to the average person on the channel. I think the next thing I want to get is a better bass. I'm just, as I talked about in the stream last Sunday, which I've put unlisted because I've said some stupid things in it. Mostly that thing. But there's some dead spots on that bass neck, and 6, Dr. Gear, if you see this, I'm sorry I missed your comment about the fret. It's actually not the fret. I've got on there with a fret rocker. It might be the fret in terms of it not being all the way down at that point, but I just have never enjoyed playing that Squier compared to other basses. So maybe a better bass is the next thing that would apply to more people here. Yeah, the GL tributes are really good for the price. Really good for the price. When can we expect Noisy But Wise 68 Custom Deluxe Reverb Part 2? Hopefully this week. I ran into a weird problem on that amp. I fixed the things that I knew needed to be fixed, and that all has come out really well. But the reverb return on that, the feed coming from the reverb pot, has got a hum in it. And that hum is indicative of a ground loop, and I've done a whole bunch of stuff that I won't get into here to try to fix that. And I'm wondering if they have changed the board layout, because I've never encountered that hum issue on any other reissued 65 Deluxe Reverb. And I need to identify what the issue root cause is, or whether there's a change to the board that's going to affect a lot of them. And I have a potential fix in mind, and I'm hoping to get to that this week, at which point that thing will be posted. I try not to come to you guys with problems in the videos. I try to come to you guys with solutions. And due to some family stuff, I've not had time to find that solution yet. So all I'd just be doing is saying, here's the problem, and then I'd have a whole bunch of random guesses as to what the fix would be, some of which would be insane, others would be things I've already tried. So, you know, that's not me being egotistical, it's just the way tech talk on YouTube goes. I've already spoken to some really good techs, Brad included, about this problem, and everyone's just as mystified and stumped as I am. So I need to roll up my sleeves and put on my big brain and figure it out. See you, Rob French. Thanks for checking in with us. Let's see now. People talking about the sound. The Z coils are amazing. I have not tried them. Hopefully the audio stays good for the rest of the stream. I don't think any of the audio issues are on my end, unless it's something to do with buffering, but I'll have to find out afterwards. Very frustrating. Yeah, the Deluxe Reverb issue is much better than the Blues Junior. You want the 65 though, not the 68. Brad had a cathode biased, the new cathode biased Blues Junior, and it's much better, he says. Good. I need to talk to you off stream about that. I've spotted a used Fender hot rod for $360 US. I feel like I'm a fool to not take this deal, especially factoring in the retail price. Any opinions? Yeah, avoid that like the plague. It's probably overpriced at $360. The average hot rod or blues amp after the 2-year warranty period is expired needs about $350 worth of work to be kept going. And depending on whether that work is done before massive burns occur or not really sets the longevity of that amp. And so I just think they're better uses of your $360. For another $40, you get a used AC15 C1, which would be a much better amp, Sonny. Much, much better. Yeah, it only took them 30 years to figure out how to buy an EL84, Brad. Yeah. They figured it out a long time ago. It only took them 30 years to care. And Wes had a cathode bias version 4 biased at 91%. So they're getting there. They're getting there because some other techs had some of the first ones and they were biased really cold for cathode biased. Let's see. They do literally catch fire, Steve. I've had too many come in afterwards. Sample size is a big part of it. I have seen more than most. Most people have the one that they have or the buddy has. And I've had many, many dozens come through the shop, all with the same failures, all heat related. Well, a single 2x12 cabs sound nearly the same as two 1x12 cabs, same volume speakers would. No, they won't. They're going to be good. Each is going to be a very different form of good. But due to speaker interaction and the volume being shared with two, and it's a larger amount of volume for each speaker to interact with, they're going to sound very different. Did Amnesia. Hey, To-Do-Tube. I've installed many post-phase inverter master volumes, the ones with a double pot of 250K with a 2.2 meg resistors, but in a JCM 800, the bias polarization rises too much as the master opens. Any recommendations? I'm not sure what you mean by bias polarization. If you have the 2.2 from the wiper to lug 1 of each pot, so it's from the bias, the raw bias supply, or the bias feed from the bias pot to the tube, it should not have any issue. What I have run into one amp out of hundreds that I've done this to where the pot failed in such a way that the bias was going wrong, and changing the pot fixed that. But the circuit itself, if all is well, that 2.2 meg resistor is going to keep the bias from going crazy. So the output, the coupling cap from each side of the output of the phase inverter goes to lug 3 on each side of the pot. Lug 2, the wiper of each pot, goes to the grid of each tube with a grid stopper in place. And lug 1 of both pots is tied together going to the bias. That's how it should be done. Not to ground, but to bias. And then that 2.2 meg keeps the bias always referenced no matter what's going on with the pot. So, but I'm not sure what you mean by polarization. Thank you, sent to me. That's very kind of you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Let's see. Trying to see the next question. Goody Guitars just got a Friedman PT20. Nice little amp. Good price on that too. Let's see. People talking about crowns. And people talking to each other during the last break. And the stream just scrolled. Where's the next question? Where's the next question? Come on. All right, the negative voltage is stable, but the dissipation of the tubes increases too much when I open it, especially halfway through the travel. That sounds to me like you have leakage from the coupling caps coming off the phase inverter, which means that as you turn the pot up and the wiper, which is connected to the grids, is closer, has less resistance between them and the output of the coupling caps, any voltage which is leaking on those coupling caps will be on the grid, which is going to, because you're going to have a positive voltage leaking through those coupling caps, which is going to offset the negative voltage from the bias, which means your tubes are going to go crazy. So that's what I mean. That's much better than polarization. The dissipation increases when you open it. That means you've got leaky coupling caps, most likely, in your phase inverter, coming off your phase inverter. So that's the issue there. And what you can do, pull the output tubes for this test. Don't have any output tubes in the amp. Lift the two coupling caps off the board at the end where they would connect to the tubes. Leave the ends connected to the phase inverter. And put a 1 meg resistor from each side to ground temporarily and measure that DC voltage. And odds are you're going to find a couple of tens or hundreds of milliamps of voltage there. That's the test. You have to do the test with some kind of resistance to ground. Otherwise, you're just going to have a wildly fluctuating voltage measurement that won't be of any meaning. So it sounds like you probably do have leakage in the coupling caps, and you would have the same problem, or you'd have a worse problem if you didn't have the master volume installed, because you'd always be connected straight to the leaking coupling caps. And I don't know what year your 800 is, but I certainly have seen that very commonly in the JCM 900s from a few years later, where the 400 volt box caps on the phase inverter output do leak, and the fix is to replace them with 630 volt caps. Spider-Man, how to fix an once working reverb tank on a 65 Super Reverb. Replace it. Reverb tanks are essentially unrepairable unless you have access to a reverb tank manufacturer, in which case they have the tooling to do it. But it's really, really difficult when it is at all possible. I mean, technically, you might be able to rewind a transducer, but the little pins that connect to the springs, once those break, that's impossible. And once the spring loses its designed amount of tension, you can't retension them. I've got a tank here that I use for testing amps, and it's perfect for that. But the springs are like hanging down a huge amount. And if you walk in the room, you hear bong, bong, or through an amp, you hear thunder. So it's unusable in an amp, but still is a great test. That's why it became my test tank. Let's see, hit the wrong button. A better bass. Yeah, I wish I could do that guy's accent. A better bass. I can't do it. I mean, he's like more Yorkshire than Yorkshire. Bass. I don't. My sinuses won't let me make those sounds. I go up north to visit my wife's family, and everyone's way up in their nasal cavities, and it just exhausts me. I can't go there myself. I'm all down here and relaxed, and they're all, I'm not making fun of my wife's family. They're lovely people. They just happen to be from Illinois and Wisconsin and all that, and it's a very different headspace, literally. Other than a touring musician in many different cities, countries, is a brown box really necessary for using a vintage amp? With the caveat that the brown box is not the only way to achieve this. You can also do the variac and other means. A lot of vintage amps were designed, specifically old Fenders and Gibsons from the 50s and 60s, were designed when wall voltages in America were closer to 110, 114. And when you use them at 120, the heater voltage is way too high. And if the heater voltage exceeds 6.7 volts AC, you can have problems. So it's nice to be able to keep the amp operating as it was designed, because the secondary is a ratio of the primary, and it's designed for X, Y, or Z primary, and you don't have the same, or you have more on the primary, you're proportionally going to have a lot more on the secondary. So a 5-volt increase on the primary can be a very large increase on certain secondaries. So it's very nice for a lot of old amps to be operating closer to how they originally would have been, so 110 to 114 volts. Brown box is really not helpful as far as changing countries, because you've got to do other things. But you can also say, all right, I'm going to do a European tour, and everything here is spec for 240, but we got 255 volts coming out of the wall. So if you have a European version of the brown box, where whatever, you can say, I'm going to turn that down to 240 or 230, whatever I think the amp sounds best as. So it's not necessary, but it's often very, very helpful. Opinion on the Clapton style boost circuit in some Fender Strats. I'm not a big fan of it. Well, let me caveat that. I'm not a big fan of that as used by Clapton. I thought his sound was kind of generic in that period where he's using that boost and all the chorus and stuff. The guy who used a very similar circuit, might be the exact same circuit, I think it had a few differences, but not major differences. Ty Tabor from King's X had a very similar circuit in his Strat Ultras. And I thought he sounded fantastic, but he was doing a very different style of music into a very different style of amp with his old Lab Series stuff. I would, and you know, the EMG boost has a lot of the same stuff, similar things from EMG. I'm just not a big fan of that kind of stuff. You can do a lot of that with a pedal anyway, and then you don't have to modify an amp. Or you can get an amp that does the thing with a regular guitar. And I say this as a former huge Clapton fan. The Clapton boost just never sounded amazing to me. Is there a current production deluxe reverb that I can recommend stock? Yeah, the 65 deluxe reverb reissue. It's a good amp stock. It can be made even better for not very much money, but you know, that amp with good tubes into a good speaker sounds great. Now the trouble is almost all of them come with bad speakers. You might luck out and find one that came with a Creamback 65 or came with Celestian Gold or something, but most of them are going to have either the C12K, which sounds horrible, or the older Eminence made exclusively for Fender generic things, which also sound kind of meh. But you know, good speakers, 75 to 120 bucks. Not a hard thing to change that out. Let's see. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Hopefully the audio gremlins are gone. The trouble with the audio stuff is that you spend all this time trying to get everything sounding great, and you know that a certain percentage of viewers are just going to go to another channel as soon as that stuff happens. As soon as you have bad audio, they're gone, and you won't get all of them back. And so no matter what you do, if it's YouTube servers, if it's your ISP, you know, there's stuff just beyond your control that makes you look like you're an amateur, and I'm just not in control of everything, which makes me sad. It's hard for a control freak to accept that sometimes. Hey, Alex241, the Hendrix 20 watt is pretty good. A lot of their amps aren't that great. I would avoid all the Archon series, all the import stuff. I'm not a big fan of the custom 2-channel H, and there was another one I don't remember the name of, but the Hendrix one is pretty good, and their older ones like the Fillmore are really good, and the 30 watt and the 15 watt version of the David Grissom is a fantastic amp. So PRS makes some really fantastic amps. They make some okay amps, and they make some really bad amps. But they all look pretty, and they all say PRS. So the perception is they're all high quality. And I wish that were the case. I heard the new Jack White Panaverb has been having the same cap issues. Well, I don't know. I haven't heard that. I heard Chris put up on his video that he suspects it might be having the same cap issues because of a phone video that one of his clients sent him of an issue he was having with his Panaverb. And he said, are they going to, and I thought that the title of that and thumbnail for that video were a bit clickbaity. Until he has that amp on his bench, he won't know what's wrong with it. And the sounds that I heard in that video could easily have just been a bad tube, which is out of Fender's control, you know. And I don't want to say an amp is bad because one of those amps that was new came with a bad tube from the factory after it shipped from Asia to America to Europe or wherever, because he's in the UK. So that tube that's in that amp is not an expensive tube to begin with, because they aren't. And then they're shipped thousands of miles, and who knows how many warehouses and how many trucks and how many brown boxes have been dumped on pallets before the owner gets it home, and who knows what happened between the store and their home. One bad tube does not write off an entire amp, and so one bad tube can have the same symptom as bad caps. Now, if Chris does a follow-up video on that amp and shows that, hey, those IC caps are already leaking, yeah, absolutely valid. And I would not expect those IC caps to last very long, but I expect them to be about 2 years before they start to have any problems. Hey, to-do tube, I'm sure you've heard already my response, but it will not be the phase inverter post-phase inverter master volume that's causing the dissipation to become unstable. It's going to be a problem in the output coupling caps of the phase inverter. It's not the pot. It's going to be the caps. Unless you have a pot whose wiper is lifting, and you have a bad solder joint as well, because that 2.2 meg would keep a bias voltage reference to those tubes at all times. So if it was the pot and the pot were to go bad, that resistor is going to prevent that. The issue is going to be the voltage coming from the leaking coupling caps ahead of that. So I think that's a false allocation of blame. Now, I'd say the same thing about Chris's video about the clickbaity stuff if he were here or on the phone call. I thought that was, it's going to get good views, but it's, and I'm certainly the first to call out Fender and other companies for doing bad stuff, but it seemed a stretch to go there. Are Tonemaster amps any good? On the other side, no, they're not. They're garbage. They sound really good for certain things. The reverb and those things is great. It's a really nice reverb algorithm. It's really hard to do a good digital reverb. They did a really good digital reverb, and the amp sounds really good. If you always play clean with very little dynamics, you're not really digging in. But if you really dig in, there's a nasty compression, which to the deluxe reverb thing, and they're not built for longevity. The ICE modules that they use for the power are notorious for burning up if the weather changes. It's a lot of money to sink into a one-trick pony. But, I say that, and someone's going to get 20 years out of it and love it all the time, because they're never going to try to play Albert Collins into it. They're just going to be playing Coldplay or worship band stuff, and they're miraculously never going to have a failure, whereas most of them will. So for the same money, you can get a Boss Katana Mark II for a lot less money and get a lot more sounds. So you have a lot more versatility, equivalent quality sounds for a lot less money, and probably a slightly longer lifespan. I don't have any thoughts about build quality and tone of the Lionheart Foundry combos or Super Tops. Sorry. I don't get a lot of Laneys around here. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. You know, Brad and I both come from being musicians. We want to be musicians. We want musicians to succeed. You know, I get mad at companies on my client's behalf because if the clients knew how much they've been taken advantage of, they'd be furious. And then it's my job to let them know, oh, by the way, you just got took. And no one wants to hear that. Yeah, you can use a 561 if the 562 is not there. You're not going to get any real difference between the various types on the 10 picofarad across the 3.3 meg resistor. There's not any real voltage present there. I've been able to get the 562R and 10 picofarad, but almost anything would work there. I'm sure I've probably used a 561 as well. Let's see. Next question. Some good philosophy. Mallory Yellow. Well, something's up to do tube, and it cannot be. It's not the circuit. I've installed that circuit in so many Marshalls, including JCM800s, and it's not the circuit. Something else is contributing to that. And maybe you have new bad Mallory caps. I don't know. If I had your amp on the bench, I could tell you what the actual cause is. But from this information, it's not going to be the circuit. It may be a bad component used in that circuit. Maybe you've just had really bad luck with a couple new components that don't work. But that circuit does not cause bias issues. I love watching people argue with Brad about text decisions. I say this in all honesty. I'm one of the very few people that you're likely to ever meet or hear from or interact with who's at all qualified to criticize Brad or give Brad suggestions. And I think you might notice that I don't spend any time criticizing him or correcting him or telling him things. Sometimes I'll say, "Hey, I had that amp on my bench, and check this thing. It's a weird one. Sometimes that fails." That's just sharing shop talk and tips. But when people start to argue with Brad, his knowledge or his motives, come on, man. This is a job that there are qualifications for. This is not what flavor of ice cream do you like? This is a knowledge of how circuits work and electronics work. And when you argue with people, it's like arguing with your doctor about, spinal surgery. No, we're not qualified to have that argument. And I'm not singling anyone out, but, Tone Master reverb sounds okay, but nothing like a spring reverb. No, it doesn't really sound like a spring, but it really sounds good, which is a hard thing to do in a digital algorithm when that's not the only thing the DSP is being dedicated towards. There's a reason that when I was playing earlier, I was letting you hear the reverb out of the Tone X and the reverb out of the HX Stomp, but when I was playing through the 65 Deluxe reverb, I had the reverb on the amp actually off because what would happen was that the trail would come down and then this gate would turn off and you'd hear the reverb coming from through that speaker, through that mic and this mic, and the reverb would jump up at the end. So I just turned the reverb off on the amp and was using a Abbey Road plate reverb in post, which sounds fantastic, but the DSP required to do that plate reverb on this Mac, that would be an entire box like the HX Stomp just for that one sound. It's just really hard to incorporate that into an overall modular circuit. But I thought the reverb on the Tonemaster was spectacular, and I liked the clean sounds very much. But I did not. As soon as you played hard, it was like you had the world's worst compressor pedal built in. Bottom Kitchen is currently playing through a Vox AC30 headphone amp plugged into a stereo receiver, and it sounds astonishingly decent. I had one of those. The problem I had was that the switches and pots turned intermittent within like 3 days of using it. It was way too bright, but not a bad sound. But I was really disappointed in the build quality of my little plastic $30 gadget. So expectations. Man, that's the thing. Brad repaired a Tonemaster DSP card motherboard last week. Shorted Schottky diode on a 3.3 buck regulator. Bit of a Hail Mary, but it worked. That's the thing. When Brad and I criticize these companies, we want everyone to have a good product, and we're capable of fixing the things for which either there's a schematic or you can figure it out within the time frame which is suitable for the client's budget. So he could find a shorted Schottky and replace it. And I've done similar things on ICE modules where, okay, they've got this ferrite bead that shorts, and the fix is just to jumper it so the ferrite bead is gone. It doesn't need a ferrite bead. It's a thing that makes sense if you're designing for a cell phone. It doesn't matter at all for a guitar app, but it tends to short, so bypass it. When we can get in there and say, oh, this is what's wrong with it, and fix it, we're happy. We love fixing stuff, especially when it's like, oh, it's just the diode. Or I had a Line 6 Spider in a couple years ago. It's like, okay, I had one bad cap out of 800. I was able to change that cap without pulling the entire board. I was able to charge the guy like $30. We like it when we can solve the problem inexpensively and easily. And we're also capable of finding the problem. If there's either a schematic that we have access to, because it's really hard to troubleshoot a DSP circuit, or something stands out and says, hey, I'm burned, I smell bad, look at here. So yeah, what are my thoughts on the Katana Gen 3 Artist? I have not tried the Gen 3 Artist. I've just tried the 50 and 100 Mark IIs or Mark IIIs, I don't remember. I'm sure the Artist is got more options. The Katana to me is like how I recommended the HX or the Tonex instead of a $600 Champ. It's very versatile, does a lot of stuff for not a lot of money, but it is built like a cell phone. So will you still have the same cell phone in 5 years? Probably not, most of us. Will you still have the same digital model or amp that you got for $300 in 5 years? Maybe, but odds are, by its very nature, today's $500 digital modeling amp will be obsolete 5 years from now, and you're going to want something else, even if the old one continues to work. Hey, Gooden, what size and shape T15 do I use on my Hacko? Anything? I just use chisel tips unless if I were to be doing a whole bunch of SMD stuff, I might go to one of the tiny little points. Though I'd also be using a heat gun for a lot of that stuff, But in general, on the big Hacko, the main Hacko, the 951 or whatever it is, I'd use the small, I think it's 3 or 4 millimeter chisel tip, and then I've got a great big honking huge chisel tip on the 80-watt Weller that I use for chassis. The Neuneighbor is the best digital reverb for my money. It's a really good one, but what's the best way to put this? It sounds like things that haven't been dreamed up yet, as opposed to sounding like things that were dreamed up in 1968 or 1974. And so I think the Neuneiber stuff is really cool. I tend to like more subtle stuff, and I find that it doesn't have a footprint for subtle stuff to stand out in an amp in a mix. If you're doing a great big obvious thing with like infinite reverb trails, it's gorgeous, and you can do all these things. But if you just want a little bit of a wet environment for your amp that can be heard in the mix, sometimes you need it to be kind of nasty with a bunch of mids if you hear it by itself. And I've not found the Neighbors are the best for that. Which is why you need one of those, and you need some funky old shit as well that's not very good in an objective sense, but in a band you can hear it. Let's see. $180 Super Twin Reverb, perfect for the dorm room. Whew. I was thinking about that, Sun Tzu. He says the best digital spring he's heard is UA Golden, best plate and best hall too. I did a review of the Dream 65 and the Ruby a couple years back, and there were things about those pedals I really liked, and those things about those pedals I thought were not quite there. And yeah, Tor, that'd be great. The Surfy Bear stuff would be a great compliment to the new neighbor. Anyway, I was saying, there are things about those UA pedals I liked, things I didn't think were as great as maybe people were saying. And with a little more experience of other current digital modelers in a similar price point, I do think that the reverbs that UA is doing are fantastic. I think that is one of the strengths of that pedal, that if I were to redo those reviews now, I would certainly point that out. I was comparing them to which is a fair comparison. I was comparing the reverb sound of the 65 Dream, or Dream 65, to the reverb of a Gibbs Accutronics tank in an actual 1965 Deluxe reverb. And in comparison to that, no, the UA wasn't as cool. In comparison to the reverbs in the Stomp, the HX Stomp, and in comparison to the reverbs in the Tonex, the UA stuff is phenomenal. So it's not as good as the stuff they're modeling, but it's really good. And it is, in many measurable ways, much better than the other digital modeling stuff in those price ranges. The issue is $400 gets you a Tonex and a Tonex One, or $400 gets you an HX Stomp. $400 will get you one of the UA amp things. You can get the Marshall one, or the Fender one, or the Tweed one, or the Fox one, but you can't. Those are the sounds it does. And I think if you have a lot of money and you're professional, you do this for a living, sure, it makes sense, because you really have a lot of control over the variables of that one kind of amp sound that you don't get with the other things on the market. But it's such a big investment to make for just a substitute for a Fender, when I think to those who can really hear the difference, if you can afford to buy 6 of the UA pedals, you can probably afford to buy an actual Deluxe reverb to use in the studio. And for those for whom they cannot afford the Deluxe reverb, they also cannot afford to have multiple versions of things, and they might be better off with just the Tonex or whatever. So, but yeah, I think I was not as positive about the UA reverb as I would be now. I almost missed yours, Bobby Bones, because I didn't see the question marks. Should you get a bigger cab for your orange lunchbox, or you just keep it out for combo unit at pawn shops? Been playing for a year. Learn on one of the little lunchboxes apps. Depends on, are you going to be gigging? If you're going to be gigging, I don't know what the wattage of the lunchbox orange is. What's the wattage? Because you don't want to invest a lot to support an amp that's not going to be able to hang with a drummer, depending on the style of music you play. If you just want to have a better sound at home, 20 watts. What cab do you have with it now, Bobby Bones? Because you got the little lunchbox. What are you plugging into? I never hear surf music again. It's hard to do that on this. hold hands as we watch the sunrise. So you got a little 8-inch speaker from the Orange. Yeah, I think you should probably get a 1x12 cab. Get a 1x12 cab. See what's available in the pawn shops. For the Orange amp, if you can find something with a greenback or a vintage 30, you're going to be in a really good place, and you're going to think that your amp is 18 times better than you ever dreamed of, because you've not been hearing your amp through that little 8-inch speaker. So yeah, look for a used by 1x12. It doesn't have to be an Orange. It just needs to be an impedance that works with your amp. And on the back of your Orange lunchbox, it'll say like 4, 8, 16. Go with 8 or 16. Just find whatever used 1x12 you can find. It doesn't have to be. Don't at this point. Don't worry if it's open back or closed back. But if you can find one with a vintage 30 or a Celestian greenback, you're gonna be really, really happy with that Orange. Let's see. Almost to the end. Let's see. Making sure. Do I take Leslie amps for repair? No, I've repaired some Leslies for some local studios, but I had to bring the entire thing here, and I would do it again if the studios needed it again, but I fixed them, then they stayed fixed. For some of the studio stuff, you know, I've had some Hammond stuff here that I brought back to install and test, and some stuff I've had to bring all my tools to studios to fix some Hammonds and some Leslies and stuff. But I would not be interested in someone shipping me a Leslie amp to repair, because it's tricky to test it if you don't have the actual device. Yeah, Seth, I do love the chisel tip just as a set and forget. Sorry, my sinuses are getting not great. The weather keeps changing. Let's see, any other questions? I think we're caught up. Wow. Have I repaired any Fishman Loudbox acoustic amps, AP530S? I tried to. It was unrepairable. The build quality was too bad. What speakers are my choice for a vintage for a J245? I like the silver bells from Weber, which is about as close as you can get today to the silver frame Alnicos that were used in the original J245 with a 2x12. If you're talking about if you're doing a 2x12, I like those, or the Celestian Blues, or the G12H30 if you want a little less low end, or the I'd also quite be happy with the ET65s, or the what's it called? Creamback 65s. If you're doing a 4x12, I think you want 20 or 25 watt Celestian greenbacks. So I think we're going to be wrapping it up pretty soon. We got about 9 minutes, so let's just shoot the shit for a little bit. So I think I've got most of the audio stuff sorted out when the servers allow. And I haven't really played this on here because that's not the point of this, but this is what this sounds like in this room to this mic with the current stuff on. And if that's too loud, I can put on this pad. Let's see if this helps. But this thing is a Canon, so I was getting really close to clipping the mic tree itself. So I might have to have a different setup if I were actually going to have real playing on this thing. But I think I'm making some real good strides on the sound compared to last week's stream, especially. I was so embarrassed last Saturday's stream when I tried to show how the different inputs on the Bassman work. And I thought that you were hearing it, and you guys were hearing a terribly gated version because of an oddity in logic that I was unaware of. Suffice it to say, everything was being gated from the wrong source. So the trouble when you're doing this, you can't hear it. You have to set it up ahead of time and cross your fingers that everything stays the same. And there was a new feature in Logic that I didn't realize had been implemented, and it sure as hell was. This is an Eastman E8D, which is their version of AHD28. They've got two versions of this. This is the E8D, which has got the Sitka. They also have, I think it's the E20D, which has got the Adirondack, which is more of a bear claw thing. And the new versions of these, they've got the roasted maple. This one doesn't. But I'm really happy with it. And I was going to, hey, T777, I was thinking about doing the Bassman jumpering video in this video and just having my iPhone set up over there. But I did not have time to set that up. So I did not in this. Maybe I'll do a little video on that, something to throw out on the channel this week. Yeah, but Mad Max, I really like this guitar. It is better for about $1,400 than many $3,000 and lower Martins that I've played, and it's beautiful. It's got the little open gear tuners and the little diamond volute, and all the details are just like the Martin. The exception, it's got the scarf joint and a little block seam here. This is two pieces of wood and the scarf joint rather than one solid piece, which makes it a lot less than the Martin, but it sounds great, it plays great. It's got a very comfortable neck shape, and scarf joint is actually very, very, very strong. What am I cooking this weekend? Well, I don't know if I'm going to be cooking anything this weekend, Brad. I've been doing most nights. I've been driving out to my mom's and making her dinner. So 2 nights ago, because of everything I had to do, she had Marie Callender's Swedish meatballs and gravy and some fresh asparagus and a fruit salad. And then last night she had a tiny little Stouffer's lasagna and a big salad and some watermelon. And it's Saturday night. I think I'm actually going to cook her something real tonight, but it'll be cooking for her. I'm not going to be eating with her. And I'm thinking I'm probably going to do a hamburger steak and a roast sweet potato and get some more of that watermelon, because the watermelon's in season right now and it's really good. And maybe I think I've got some more of that asparagus for her. So that's what I'll be cooking this weekend. Stuff for my mom. But some of it is store-bought stuff. And then tomorrow night, I may just give her an Amy's enchilada with something, probably more of a salad. I'm really looking forward to hearing this back to see how the whole thing comes out, aside from that one period where apparently everything was awful. And I'm interested to see if the playback is all awful. I won't know till then. Chris R., hey, I'm glad you're here. First of all, recommend Dishoom cookbook. Yeah, I really wanted to go to Dishoom while we were there, and time did not really allow. And but I had very much wanted to do Dishoom, and the next time we go, we will. We did go to some fantastic Indian restaurants. One was Punjabi, one was Pakistani. We went to Lahore Chop House in the East End, and I can't remember the name of the place we went to up on Euston. That was really fantastic. Euston Road, just a little bit west of the British Library, maybe 4 or 5 blocks. It was really wonderful. But I did want to go to Dishoom. But the reason I specifically said, hey, Chris R., I'm glad you're here. last Sunday's stream, I saw after the fact that you asked what interface I was using, and I didn't see it at the time, so I didn't answer at the time. I'm using the Motu M2, and aside from the fact that I need more inputs to do these streams more efficiently, I'm really happy with it. It really sounds good. And it's really nice to have the monitoring features that it has. So I'm really pleased with that. We'll swap free room and lodging for amp advice if you're coming to UK. Oh my God. Well, I will let you know. I would certainly be willing to take you up on that, because lodging is the biggest part of expense of going to London or the UK in general. And Mark Spurgeon, you're smoking the port. I'm glad you're here, Mark. I'm glad you're up and able to do anything. Mark just had some back surgery, so that's really good news. I might do some ribs tomorrow night for Nikki and myself. I probably won't have time to do actual barbecue, but something involving salt and pepper and garlic and maybe some kraut. You can do good things with ribs in the oven. Real interested to hear how all these things sound back. The actual amp, the modeling stuff, the acoustic here, just, not the ideal mic setup for this, but this thing is so loud. Do I have a smoker? I've got a big Weber charcoal grill. I've got a big gas grill, and then I've got an electric smoker. I'm in Memphis, son. Don't talk to me about smokers. Trouble is, when it gets to be barbecue season here, it's also mosquito season. And unless you're in Houston or New Orleans or the Everglades, you got nothing on Memphis, So the mosquitoes take over the outdoors here starting in late June. It's a real thing. Anyway, it's about time to wrap this up. I really appreciate everyone for being here, and I'm going to get to the stuff I have set up for the end of the stream. Way too hot to use an oven indoors down here. Yeah, we have fans for that. Yeah, the TC, the Sur attenuator is so much better than the Weber Mini Mass. And yeah, and over the power scaling mod, just the Sur reactive load is fantastic, cost effective, efficient, and safe. And so what else do you need? Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next time.